When I was running for mayor, I remember a conversation with Nigel, and the subject of authenticity came up. And it was, look, I'm inherently scruffy. I would just wear jumpers all the time. And it was, do I need to wear a suit and tie? Is that what people accept of a mayor? Or should I do the Yanis Varoufakis thing and try and be cool? And you can imagine Nigel's facial expression when the word cool came up. And he said, look, even Jeremy and John worked out that you have to wear a suit and tie, eventually. And he says, well, for God's, we always say gold, for God's sake, don't do that new Labour thing of wearing a suit without a tie and open collar. So I am today honouring Nigel's wishes. And someone earlier was lobbying me for something and said, it's what Nigel would have wanted, it's what Nigel would have done here. And I do have to leave after this because I've got a round table, name dropping, with Michael Marmot to do what we can about health inequality in our region. So apologies that I won't hear everybody else. It's wonderful to be in a room like this. And it's the sort of thing that harks back to the days when we funded adult education properly as the Mining Institute, which it was formerly, and that it shouldn't necessarily all be about the austere. And there is a depth in adult education that speaks to what echoes down through the ages. I have a packet of Northumberland wildflower seeds that Nigel gave me, and the mix contains flowers that will thrive in harmony with our local ecosystem. And it speaks to his ecological sensitivity and his profound sense of place. Nigel's sudden but peaceful death last year happened during the COVID lockdown, and I've not seen Nigel for many months because of that. And I think, like many of us here, I don't feel I've said goodbye. Nigel was a paid-up Gramscian. The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born, wrote Antonio Gramsci. And Nigel's life was about building that new world, here and now, in the mess and madness of the old. He was both a genius and an expert at what he did. Where others would rail at injustice, Nigel acted. He had little patience for vainglorious committee meetings. And in one Labour group meeting, quietly remarked, "We are just actors in a play that has neither audience nor script." And those who've been in Labour group meetings know exactly what he means. We'll be hearing today from many of those whose lives Nigel touched. That today has such a packed schedule says everything you need to know about how people responded to Nigel's mentorship, his friendship, and that subtle subversion. I won't attempt to detail the reach of Nigel's work, and nor should I. That's the whole point of collaboration and cooperation. After I wrote an article in last March's Chronicle as a tribute to Nigel, John McDonnell, who read it somewhere online, messaged me. Your tribute describes him perfectly, John said. I didn't even know that they knew each other, and that's how deep Nigel's roots were in the Labour and cooperative movement. High on the wall of Stowell Street is a stone carving of a sheaf of wheat, a spade and a sickle. Labour and wait reads the motto. It's on the side of the old cooperative warehouse. It's a reminder, Nigel told me, that prosperity is about long-term sustainability. The fruits of our labour would take time and hard graft. He was chair of the Cooperative College, that intersection of adult education and the cooperative movement. For Nigel, cooperatives were never in the abstract. He lived it, literally. His home was part of the West End Housing Cooperative. He was the driving force behind Greening Wingrove, a community cooperative owned and run by the people who live there. The bike garden and the events in Nunswell Park are part of that new world. Nigel had been working with the team at the North of Tyne on our sustainable funding for communities to tackle climate change and food poverty. Everything from vertical veg growing to the generation of clean community energy was in the mix. Tommy Tankey, his topiary steam train sculpted from the privet, brightened the terrace street right outside his home. And talking about it would raise that characteristic smile of warmth and that sparkle of gentle subversion in his eyes. Nigel served his community as a Newcastle councillor since 1980. I asked his advice before becoming a councillor, as we heard earlier. I've always taken the approach, he told me, that a councillor should not be a cheerleader for the council out in the community, but a shop steward for the community inside the council. He stayed true to his principles. If he thought something was wrong, he'd vote against it. Nigel, I think, was the most whipped politician in this city for a long time. But he also stood up against the freemen on Nunsmill Park. Establishments of any form held no intimidatory factor for Nigel. We were both councillors in Newcastle when the Norfolk Tyne was being created, and I'd asked a lot of women councillors, and in one case an MEP, if they wanted to stand. I said, I'll run your campaign, and I'll make sure you get elected. But they all said no, it wasn't for them, it wasn't what they wanted to do. And some said eventually, James, just stop asking other people to do it and run yourself. I thought, so Nigel was one of the first people whose advice I asked. And we met in the Tyneside coffee rooms. Actually, I'm guessing that anybody who ever met Nigel met him in the Tyneside coffee rooms at some point. This could be a good opportunity, he said, if you run on a platform of red-green socialism, you could really make a difference. And we spoke about policy, about cooperatives, about adult education, about how local government had been hollowed out and was seen by some as an exercise in management rather than civic leadership. He helped me with my manifesto, and the fruits of that labour can be seen today with the partnership between the Norfolk Tyne Combined Authority and the Workers' Education Association. Nigel held a total belief in shared humanity across race, gender and ethnicity. Greening Wingrove uses the Rainbow World logo as a symbol of diversity. He campaigned for international justice and visited Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh and educational trips to Auschwitz. And I remember we were both attending an event in the mosque. I think it might have been an Eid event. And it had been commented on previously that we both always wear red socks. And it was never coordinated, certainly wasn't intentional or planned. So I think it must just be some subconscious subversive act from both of us. But there's a good photo of both me and Nigel in our red stocking feet in the mosque. He helped me in my mayoral selection campaign. Nigel was very active on social media. And in fact, it seems it was one of the last things he did. He was campaigning at the end. He died with his boots on. But again, rather than rancour or anger, he would make his points with evidence and often with irony. I remember in the run-up to Christmas 2019, I'd written this post about Christmas songs. And I'd referenced Jonah Louie, Stop the Cavalry, about a message of peace. And Nigel said, it's a risky business giving opinions on musical taste. I think as Norfolk Tyne Mayor, you're allowed to like Lindisfarne, and that's it. His daughter Selina wrote, and I quote, like most children in the so-called post-war golden age of social mobility, Nigel failed his 11+ exam and attended a secondary modern school until he was 15, and owed his education to the labour movement. In his late teens, he became a clerk for the WEA and an adult education organisation founded by trade unionists and socialists in 1903. The WEA sent him to Ruskin College, a trade union-funded adult education college in Oxford, where he met my mother, said Selina. And we'll be hearing from Selina later today. A historian and adult educator by profession, Nigel published 3 books. For him, education was about enrichment. It was history from below, not the kings and queens, but the ordinary heroes on the front line. He ran a mobile socialist bookshop, and I remember him volunteering to turn up at a Ken Loach event at Gosford Civic Theatre with his mobile bookstall that came out the back of his car, generously donating any of the proceeds to the cause. One of his books, In Excited Times, is about Tyneside struggles against the black shirts and British fascism. Indeed, I first met Nigel 30-odd years ago as part of TWAFA, Tyne and Weir Anti-Fascist Association. Nigel was involved, as ever, in enabling people, mentoring and speaking at anti-fascist events, and there have been very few protests against racism and fascism that Nigel hasn't attended in this city for the past generation. And at that time, there was a spate of violent attacks on anti-racist campaigners from organised fascist groups. For those who don't know, I have a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu, and I was involved in helping people deal with those threats. And I remember back in the early 90s, teaching Nigel some self-defense techniques, or trying to teach Nigel some self-defense techniques. And it's fair to say that his talents lay in other forms of struggle. But that wasn't for lack of bravery or lack of persistence. I've seen him stand alone and make his point, and he would always back up his arguments with evidence, often drawing a parallel with historical examples. He never lost sight of a better vision for the world. He wrote the biography, The Militant Democracy, Joseph Cowen and the Victorian Radicalism. Joseph Cowen was editor and one-time owner of the Chronicle, and made it one of the most successful provincial newspapers in Britain. And that connection between the radicalism and what is often seen as a pillar of the establishment press is a very interesting read. He wrote Roses and Revolutionists, the story of the Close and Hill Free Communist and Cooperative Colony in 1894 to 1909. But Nigel wasn't just a chronicler of the history of the progressive politics of the North East. He was that history. Not only was he there, but he brought out the analysis and the context. And he could always articulate a parallel. There's an example in Spain, he would begin, or, yes, I remember in America in the 1940s, and his knowledge was encyclopedic. He was a gifted storyteller. He had that gentle, gather round and listen voice, and an air of infectious calm. Nigel never sought glory or recognition, but he was a legend and a giant. With wise counsel and subtle wit, he was a mentor to so many. When he died, I asked a lot of people of their memories from Nigel, and we'll hear from some of those people today. So I'll just share one from Rachel. She said, he was always so calm, all the time. I always found that remarkable and so unusual. He was one of the first people to welcome us into politics, and I think nearly every socialist would be able to say the same. Nigel spent his life planting seeds and watching them bloom. Goodbye, Nigel. Goodbye.